welcome to another episode of Coffee Talks. Today we have a very special guest from the Caribbean, from Trinidad and Tobago, Brian Lewis. He's the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee, and he's also president of CANOC, the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committees. Welcome, Brian. Thank you for being with us here today. And Brian, I want to start out by asking you, how did you start getting involved with sport? I mean, I know you have a rugby background, but how did you start into the sport administration field?
Okay, thank you very much. First off, let me just say it's an absolute pleasure to be on Coffee Talk. I'm just waiting for my cup of coffee, because you need coffee for Coffee Talk. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. How did I get involved in sport? Lifelong. Grew up single parent, eldest of 4 children in a community called Belmont. You know, sports became my reference point growing up, almost like a surrogate father. Because as I said, I didn't grow up with a father. And to be honest, that created some dysfunctions. You know, it is with young boys, and especially growing up in the 60s, when I grew up here in Trinidad and Tobago, it was a, Belmont, that community was a hotbed of social activism, Black power, you know, surrounded by a lot of young men at the time who were rebelling against the colonial structure of society. And, you know, being anti-authority was part of the ethos growing up. I was surrounded by it. And, you know, I have to admit, I carried a bit of a chip on my shoulder, not having a father, and going to school, and the other boys who had a father would have simple things like getting their homework completed, especially different subjects such as geometry and algebra. So I was a bit, let's just put it kindly, pushing back against different things, including authority. So sport, and being involved in sport from a very young age, as I said, provided that balance, that positive experience, that help in developing a positive self-esteem. And
which sport were you involved with? Did you practice track, football?
Yeah, well, back then, the major sports, sports was seasonal. We have 2 seasons essentially here in Trinidad and Tobago, dry season and wet season. So in the dry season, the sport of cricket was predominant.
Okay.
And in the dry season, it was predominantly football. So
is it still the same these days? I mean, right now, is it still cricket and football, or has evolved to other sports now?
Well, as I said, growing up, we played football in the wet season, and we played cricket in the dry season. You know, we played a lot of cricket and football in the streets. And so that kind of fueled my positive experience and interaction with sport. It also formed in very real and profound ways a distraction from some of the at-risk tendencies I may have had at that time.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely a discipline, no, and something that gets you like out of other distractions to keep going every day. Okay, this is my outlet, no, and it makes you, as you said, like it's something that makes you look forward to. And then you start with sport. You play different sports.
Right. So that I played different sports. Was very active. Went to what you call primary school here, and then you go to. So I was good, and a coach encouraged me to pick up track and field. So I started doing a little track and field, winning races in what we call primary school, which is really the school phase from age 5 until, let's say, 11, 12. And then I went to secondary school, which is the equivalent from 12 to 17, 18. So playing sports, not being good at some, being a little better than others, you know, I kind of cleaved towards track and field in the early. But quite frankly, I still had this inherent tendency to be indisciplined. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Pushing back at authority figures, especially male. So a lot of my resentment I may have had for not having a father, I kind of channeled that. It was a sort of a dilemma, because while on the other hand, most of the male figures in sports at that time were positive, I still pushed back because I sort of transferring that blame and resentment and anger towards mainly male coaches, so that I didn't apply the necessary, but believe it or not, I didn't apply the necessary discipline in sport. So went through that phase, and then when I graduated from high school, I had to go and work because I had to help my mother. I just had to help. I couldn't place the burden on her to pursue whether it be my passion, sport, etc.
This is after high school, right? So after,
yes, so at age 17,
after Fatima. Okay.
I went into the work. In fact, I started off as an office boy in a printry, earning $50 a week. Then I went and worked in the oil fields in Trinidad and Tobago. Here, Trinidad being an oil and energy. Oil and energy is big here.
Yeah.
So that period, I kind of drifted away from competitive sport. I more became a sport fan. And then when the oil downturned in the 80s, I was retrenched from the oil fields. And I went into insurance. And it was at that point that I got back involved into competitive organized sports. But this time, the sport of rugby, I was encouraged by a very good friend.
How old were you when you started
rejoin sports? It was the 20. I probably was about 22, 23.
Okay.
24. So I was back playing competitive sport. But interestingly enough, prior to that, I was doing pretty well, started doing pretty well in the insurance sector. And a friend, a very good friend, a boyhood friend, approached me to sponsor a class in a bodybuilding tournament. And I did. And I never forget. I never forgot. I went and I was literally complaining about everything. And he got annoyed, even though I was a sponsor, right?
Yeah.
And he said, no, you seem to have to be able to identify all the problems. So why don't you come on board and solve the problem? And I said, sure. I was always up for a challenge. And I actually became the assistant public relations officer of the Trinidad and Tobago Bodybuilding Federation.
Okay.
Right? So I had an interest in that. and was more sponsoring and then and advising and supporting him. He was his name is Ramesh Murad. He was the public relations officer. So that was my first involvement
with sports.
In sports administration. And then playing rugby, again, always vocal about issues. And I just found myself, even while I was playing, going to represent my club at then it was known as the Trinidad and Tobago Rugby Football Union General Council meeting. Then I ended up being, I think, the public relations officer, if my memory serves me correct, of the Trinidad and Tobago Rugby Football Union. And I then became general secretary of the Trinidad and Tobago Rugby Football Union, albeit voluntary. And then one day someone couldn't go. I think they assigned a representative, and I was asked to attend an Olympic committee meeting. And funny enough, there was a contentious issue. And I again was very vocal about it, even though I was new. New. Didn't have a thing and express views.
What was the issue? Do you remember what was? Just curious to know.
I think it had something to do with a vote of no confidence by the hockey, and interestingly enough, the treasurer of the Olympic Committee, or something like that. But okay. Interestingly enough, the treasurer at the time was Douglas Camacho, who then became the president of the TTUC. And so around that time, election was coming, and Douglas Camacho reached out to me about what I was interested in getting involved on a slate. And it was interesting because I remember telling him, I said, listen, I'm not interested in that, so Mr. Camacho. I find, the Olympic committee official just seem to be interested in themselves, not the athletes, they're more interested in trips.
Yes.
And I never forgot. He watched me and said, well, that's the reason why I'm involving you in the team, so that we can help change that perception. And that was it. And I said, well, listen, I don't know nobody. I don't know nothing about, the politics of this thing. So if you want me to run, I'm happy to run on your state.
And what's the position he offered to you?
That position then was executive member.
Okay.
So he had a couple of positions. The structure then was president, vice president, secretary, assistant secretary, treasurer, and then he had 3 executive members. And his slate got elected, and then that was it. That was 1997.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, so you've been involved from the Olympic movement for a while.
But remember, very importantly, all of this time, from my first involvement in sports administration as the assistant public relations officer of the Trinidad and Tobago bodybuilding federation at about 23, I'm an active, competitive.
Yeah.
Right? Rugby.
Yeah. Rugby.
So I kind of, because I was a bit vocal, I got involved in sports administration, even while playing.
Correct. Yeah.
So it's not a case where I was a retired old person looking for something to do.
So your career as I wouldn't say politician, but as like a vocal person, as a advocate, I would say a sports advocate, started since you were an athlete, even before. Because
as I said, that's because of my upbringing, as I said.
Yeah. So it came out of.
I was brought up by very strong women too, because as I said, my mother it was an abusive situation, but out of respect for my dad, even though he has died, and his family, who I have good relations with, I don't really get into too much details, but, so, and because of the environment, as I said, at the time, growing up, we always had an opinion. I always had an opinion about things. My mother encouraged that, for us to stand up for ourselves and to stand up for what you believe in. And, it's not about being popular. It's about believing in what you say. As long as you believe in it, and as long as it serves the greater good, go for it. So that, it encouraged me to be. And then, to be honest, again, because after losing my job in the oil fields and going into insurance, I was essentially independent, to a point self-made. I didn't need to depend on anybody for a living. So
the role kind of like
that financial independence at that young age also gave me I suppose,
it kind of came as a second nature. Your role kind of evolved naturally to where you are now. I mean, you started as an executive member, as you said, and then how did you start climbing up? You went then became Secretary General and then became President, or how was your journey?
Became executive member, then next go around was elected Assistant Secretary General, and that was absolutely fantastic because the secretary at the time was Elton Prescott, Senior Counsel, which, Senior Counsel is a designation. I don't know if you have that in North America, but in England, it's like the equivalent locally of a Queen's Counsel.
Yeah.
So he's a very prominent lawyer and brilliant legal mind, involved in sport for a long time. And he was actually my mentor, and I learned a lot from him. Mr. Prescott was also very involved in the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committees, very constitutional, strong in terms of constitutional law, brilliant legal mind, and absolute gem of a sports administrator, tremendous integrity. So he literally, I learned so much from him in terms of the sports administration and looking at the broader picture as a sports administrator. And then when Larry Romani, because we have term limitations in Trinidad and Tobago, so 2 terms.
What's the term duration? What's the
2
term?
terms, 4 years. 4 years. It's
4
a
years.
general, 2 terms,
Okay.
with the exception of the Secretary General position, right? So Elton stepped down when that turnaround came. And then when Larry Romani was going for president, I ran for Secretary General. And then he served 2 terms. And then when the next go around after that 2 terms, I was the Secretary General. But I decided to run for the presidency of the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee. I was very interesting at that time because I actually didn't have the support of my colleagues, my other executive committee colleagues. We had done a strategic plan, etc., which I fully supported. The only one item I didn't agree with was that they felt that they needed to bring in a very strong business person with a tremendous track record and corporate record.
Yeah.
So that they opted to support that individual. So I decided to run without that support.
That was how far in when you're role in the TTOC? Like how many years have you had in the TTOC when you
Pardon?
How many years were you in the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic
Right,
Committee?
so that would have been like 17 years from 19, because that would have been 2013, right?
Yeah.
That election, which was the first contested election for the presidency in a while, was 2013.
Okay.
So that's from 1997 to 2013.
Okay. So basically, yeah,
and then the rest is history. I was elected by the General Assembly, and I'm in my second and final term of office as president of the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee, which is also the Trinidad and Tobago Commonwealth Games Association.
Okay, and then you became president in 2013. You said
right.
14, and then you started the campaign. The Future is Female. Which year? Where did you start that? I mean, and why did you started this campaign?
So part of the vision I had articulated was a transformative one, and it was built on 3 pillars, being market-oriented, market-centered, athlete-centered, and a focus on good governance. And for me, good governance was always more than just governance principles. It also had to do with things like gender equality and gender equity. And because I was brought up by women, I'm the child of women. And as I said, my mother brought us up single parent. I was surrounded by grannies. I have tremendous respect for women and what they can do, their resilience and how resolute they are, and how, I saw my mother make do and bring up 4 children and turned whatever little she may have had into a positive. She was very good at multiplication, let's put it that way.
Multitaskers, yeah.
So coming from that, I've always had respect for women, even something as pointed as I'm a big advocate about how to put it, gender-based violence and domestic violence. As I said, it's something that was instilled in me when you brought up by a mother who has been subject to abuse. Mm-hmm. Something as little as that pivots you away. So things like sexual harassment and abuse of gender-based violence it all forms part of what drives me. So creating the Future Female program and initiative was always going to be something that I would do once I had the opportunity to lead the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic movement. And since then, I made a deliberate, intentional effort to make sure the Olympic Committee is gender equal.
And when you started with as a president, how many women in your staff were, and how did you transform that? Because I know right now you're surrounded by women there. I know Lobby there, and then Annette. So how did that transform when you started? Were there any other women in the TTOC?
Oh yeah, when I came on board, there was in terms of the Olympic Committee, there was Annette Knott. Then there was Dan Henderson, Jackie Romani Pantin. Yeah, in terms of the executive. So what I then advocated for and pushed for was to have it equal. So now on the board we have Mrs. Knott, Annette Knott, Secretary General, Dan Henderson, a Vice President. The Assistant Secretary General is Nadine Khan Simongal. One of the trustees is Raquel Moses. Of the 3 executive members on the board, Rhea Richardson and Giselle Aron West rounds it off.
Okay.
And then in the office staff, there's Lovey Santana, the Senior Administrative Officer, Stacy Santana, the Project Officer, Accounts and Procurement. There is Reza Grant, Project Officer, Athlete Services and Welfare. We had Chanel Young, who is now at Pan Am Sports. And recently we have brought on, since Chanel went to Pan Am Sports, Lauren Legal.
Okay.
Lauren Legal. So yeah, we have pivoted, some will say to the other extreme where we now need to have future is male.
And did you, you've been a few years with the CANOC as well, Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committees. Did you take that vision to CANOC as well? Is it the same?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know what will happen when I'm no longer the president, but for as long as I'm president, future female is key. Being athlete-centered and market-oriented is key. I've been very open and vocal that the next president of the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee should be a female, subject to the democracy and the democratic processes. I've also been vocal in advocating that the next president of the IOC should be a female. Of course, that's in terms of the IOC, post the completion of Thomas Bach's term, which with the renewal should be 2025. I feel strongly that CANOC should be the same, Pan Am Sports should be the same, and the CASCO, which is now Central Sports, should be the same, because it is in the history of all of these organizations, they've never had a female as the president. And I think that there is time that glaring omission is addressed.
I agree. It needs to evolve, and yeah, women have been underestimated for many years, and I agree. It's really respectable.
I actually believe, sincerely believe, from my experiences, there are pros and cons in everything. But I genuinely believe that if you had more women at the decision-making table and at the head table in sport, global sport, you will have less controversy and the governance dysfunctions that we have in global sport.
It's got to be more balanced, definitely. And you got to have more, like, women think some way, men think differently, and I think it complements. And it hasn't been that balance, and not only in sport, but in general.
Of course. But you also have to remember, it's not just the gender discrimination and inequality in sport really is a symptom. It goes back to the sexism in sport, and just racial, as it goes back to the racism, the institutionalized discrimination on the basis of race and gender. Goes back to the very origins of centuries of European dominance in the world, of which sport is also part of.
It's back into like the rise of feminism in the late 18th century, in the UK, this movement of the Victorian movement, it goes all the way back there, and we can see the effect now. Even in the late 60s environmentalism, you can see the feminism movement influencing even this movement of environmentalism. But no, I fully support of your perspective, and I think I agree. Like, if you have more women in decision-making positions, things would flow better. I couldn't agree more.
I would also like to see the next president of CANOC be a female, a woman.
When is that election? The CANOC?
2022.
Okay.
But saying that, I recognize that there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, if you look at the numbers in terms of the data as it relates diversity and inclusion in the Olympic movement, it's not a pretty picture. While the IOC has done a lot of work in terms of gender equality on the field of play with the athletes, and while they have made progress in terms of the boardroom, there's still a lot of work to be done. There is no room for complacency. And I think that because of the patriarchal environment that surrounds sports that goes back to centuries, and invariably international sports being old, male, and white.
Yeah, you brought a key point there and a key word, patriarchal. I think that's a key word in this regard.
And there is need for, there's need also for men. So it can't be a woman-only battle. Men in the Olympic movement must also be sincere and genuine in supporting that and advocating that vision. And it may very well mean that some men will have to make a decision to push forward women where they're on merit. Because remember, the sport world, because it has been for so long an old boys club, the succession planning pipeline is full of men.
Yeah, but I think coming back to the word, but it comes all the way back through the patriarchy way of thinking and philosophy or way of living. But I think right now, the good thing is that people are awakening. People are being aware of this. You see women in leadership position. Like, it's been evolving in the past decade, in the past 20 years, even. Like, you can see more.
And that's why I believe, from a governance perspective, now, term limitations is an important thing. I don't subscribe to the view of some people that some people have said, well, especially in a smaller NOC, if you have term limitations, you will struggle to get leaders.
Yeah,
I believe that's an excuse, because I believe that there's enough people involved with leadership ability and integrity that term limitations will help foster renewal, governance renewal, new ideas, new thinking, and also open the way for greater diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, it's the nature of evolution there, and it comes in an institution as well. And you brought a point earlier that I want to just dive a bit deep into it. It's about athletes and, for example, the Rule 50. How do you think it will be applied during the Tokyo 2020 Games? What are your thoughts in this regard?
Well, I mean, just recently I was on a Pan Sports panel that I put on by it was the first virtual academies forum organized by the Pan Am Sports Academies Commission under the chairmanship of Alfred Emmanuel from St. Lucia.
Yes.
And there was a Rule 50 panel. I found that was very brave and commendable of Pan Am Sports to have that forum. And I'm very clear in my head that Rule 50 at best needs to be abolished, and a rule and a guidelines and regulations put in that addresses issues, but that align with the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights as it relates to freedom of expression. At best. At minimum, it is important for the Olympic movement to acknowledge its history, its sordid history, that Rule 50 is a legacy of Avery Brundage, and that Rule 50 and Avery Brundage, to use the words that if you do the research that was in the minute, the intention was to firmly suppress. And what was it to firmly suppress? Racial protests, silent, peaceful protests against racial injustices. It went back to 1968
in Mexico,
and 1972. Yeah. To this day, Vince Matthews and Wayne Collette, life ban is still in place. And as I was making the point on that panel, from 1906, there have been protests along the way, including in 1968 at that Mexico City game, Vera Kazlatavar, who made an anti-Soviet protest, and none of the protests, even the IOC itself, even Thomas Bach himself, when he bravely spoke out against Russia's anti-gay laws in Sochi, the stance that the IOC and Thomas Bach have taken in terms of the Korean Peninsula, North and South Korea, those are all political stance. And therefore, the rules should not be good for some and not good for others. And in the current environment and the modernized world, you cannot continue to firmly suppress the right of athletes to express their displeasure, express their hurt, express their advocacy against, in particular, social injustices.
And they represent not only the athletes themselves, they represent a general population. So they're communicating not only for themselves, but for a lot of people behind them. And and sport is a great platform to communicate. And as I want to quote here, Nelson Mandela, like, sport has the power to change the world. And even as cliche as it sounds, I think it's completely true. And what you're saying just resonates there. I mean, we need these athletes to bring awareness to these problems, which rules as this rule from the IOC saying that it's not blocking the athletes to express themselves, as you were saying.
Yeah. I accept that it is uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable conversation, but it is a conversation that we need to have. You know, as you look back at our history, it is, in my view, unquestioned that Rule 50 is a legacy of Avery Brundage, and it is not a case of rewriting history. It is a case of accepting our history and addressing it, making amends for it.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a pretty good point. And I want to ask you one last questions on for your closing remarks on this, and how do you think sport can contribute positively to the society in general, and what's your legacy that which I think is pretty clear, but I want you to express it the sport in Trinidad and Tobago. Let's start with that, and then we can move to the legacies of sport and how they can contribute positively to the world and society in general.
Sport, as the great Nelson Mandela said, has the power to change the world. It has the power. It's a universal language that crosses boundaries and countries and genders and race. And we must be brave, but we must also be honest and fair. We must recognize that the world of the Olympic movement at the head table and the decision-making table, as an example, does not reflect the world that we currently live in. There's need for greater diversity and inclusion. There is need for addressing the issues through sport of First People, Indigenous people, Black and colored people, women, girls, disabled. We can't continue to be homophobic. Otherwise, sport becomes superficial, only used to fill the pockets and the bank accounts of international federations and the corrupt individuals. If we don't embrace the modern realities and opportunities and provide modern youth and young people who are concerned about social injustices, climate change, the devastation of the environment, then sport will become, in many ways, irrelevant.
Yeah.
And the International Olympic Committee and the Olympic movement must not get comfortable and complacent because their bank account and because they can tick some boxes and because they say all the politically correct things and align with the United Nations, etc. But we don't walk our talk, you know. And when we talk, for example, about athlete-centered, just another issue I would like to highlight. And we say that we don't address the fact that for many of our athletes, the pursuit of the Olympic dream and the Olympic podium dream consigns many of them to poverty. They sacrifice their careers, they sacrifice their health, they sacrifice family and friends. And regardless of what we say, the fact is that we say one thing, but we create the environment that they are literally forced to do this. Because if they want to aspire to be on the Olympic podium, they have to. You can't any longer do it recreationally. But then still say that, you know, they must do it for free while sports administrators and leaders fly around in stay in five-star hotels and get podiums and all of these things. And we wouldn't even consider whether we call it medal bonuses, right? So that the Olympic Committee, for example, here in Trinidad and Tobago, we created a program called 10 Goal by 2024. And we created a fund where we fundraise, like I would walk the marathon, 26.2 miles, and other fundraising ventures, to create a fund where we are able to pay medal bonuses. So the payment is related to performance, right?
Yeah.
These are things we need to now look at as an Olympic movement. And if it is that we believe that it is not sustainable because we're dealing with 10,500 athletes, then what I'm saying is then maybe some of, you see, we even the Olympic Charter speaks about Olympic movement leaders are volunteers, right? Maybe we really need to live that now and sacrifice some of the privileged lifestyle and use the savings to afford our athletes, especially those who excel by virtue of the podium, an opportunity to be afforded some measure of dignity, financial dignity.
Yeah. No, and you brought a pretty good point, and I'm gonna repeat that, like, sport, it's a great way to install this change, and again, we need to become more athlete-centered. Again, like, go to, like, at the end, the athletes are the ones who are performing, who actually are doing the hard work there and coming to this big stage. And even the United Nations have named sport as a really important catalyst for change. I mean, and gender equality, racial injustice, and also, as you were saying, in climate action. Even the United Nations created this framework called United Nations Sport for Climate Framework. I mean, and the IOC is doing a good job, and you mentioned Walk the Talk there with all the sustainability initiatives, but there's a lot of work to keep doing in this regard. And, well, thank you, Brian. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, and it's really good to have someone like you to express this, and with all your experience. And I couldn't agree more with what you express and your philosophies. And just anything else that would you like to express, to send a message to young athletes that are trying to achieve their dreams, or some future sports
I know that
administrators?
time is on its own. I know that, you know, I don't want you to leave any important things that I have said on the floor, because you have to cut it. I'm really looking forward to see the finished edited version of this. But if I have to say one other thing, is that I will say it by putting on my mask, because we live in a COVID world, a new normal, and it's a pink mask, which symbolizes my support for future female gender equality. And this is the month of breast cancer awareness, at least here in Trinidad and Tobago. So wearing pink is not, you know, normally they say wearing pink is not for men. Real men don't wear pink, but pink is important. And it also highlights, symbolizes for me the reality of the COVID world, that 19 world that we live in. And COVID-19 has been devastating for societies across the world, socially, economically, etc. But it has been particularly devastating for sport. It has brought and grounded sport to a standstill in many parts of the world. And sport will be changed. And it is important for us to acknowledge that it is not business as usual, and that sport has to now reinvent itself. The Olympic movement has to reinvent itself reinvent and reimage and rethink itself. And also it is important to appreciate that COVID-19 and surveys and research, even by the United Nations has shown this, that COVID-19 is gender regressive, meaning that it has a proportionately higher impact, negative impact on women, because in the construct of most societies where there are deaths and people impacted by COVID, it is women that have to fill that gap, provide care. And there's a very great risk that sport will lose a generation of athletes, that sport will lose a generation of women and young girls, either athletes, coaches, and administrators, because of the impact of COVID-19 and the reality of that impact.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing this. And yeah, it's been definitely has hit a lot of well, the whole world. I mean, it's not like a World War I or II that hit one part of the world. This has hit the entire planet, and but we keep going, and we gotta keep ourselves optimistic. And I think we're evolving in the right way, as you said, Brian. Like, more women are getting into more positions of power, which I think it's really necessary, as you said. And when slowly it's changing, and sport, it's a great way to communicate and to make people aware and raise consciousness about all the issues that you raised and that you've experienced throughout your career as a sport administrator. And thank you for taking your time to communicate your story and share your thoughts in this.
It has been an absolute pleasure,
yeah.
And I thank you for giving me the opportunity. You know, I look forward to Cartan's continued support for the Olympic movement across the globe, but in particular the Caribbean. I mean, COVID-19 has presented probably the most significant challenge to leaders and leadership across every aspect of life since World War II.
Yeah. No, well, thank you, Brian. And right now we need to go, but again, I appreciate your time, and thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next week.